So this situation happens to me a lot. I'm talking to someone and getting to know them, and they ask, "So, what do you do?" And I say, "Actually, I'm a yoga teacher." And they say, "Oh, really?" And I say, "Yeah, you should try yoga sometime. You like it." And they say, "I'm too tight for yoga. I just could never do that. No, I'm just too tight." This answer kind of drives me crazy, and here's why. Imagine a fat person saying to you, I know I need to lose some weight, but I'm just too fat to go on a diet." That doesn't make any sense, right? The reason you start a diet is because you're overweight. And the same is true in this situation. The reason you start your yoga practice is because you're tight. So don't let that stop you. In this video, we're going to give you some tips. I'm Patrick, and this is my very patient and somewhat inflexible friend, David. And today we're going to show you some variations if you are one of those people who can't touch your toes, who feels like yoga is something you could never do. Let's start off with staff pose. The ideal image for this pose is your toes completely pointing up, your legs locked and straight, and your back at a 90-degree line. But you can see David has tight hamstrings, so his pelvis isn't allowing him to come up into the full seated position. His back is curved and his toes are pointed forward. To help him out, we're going to put a block or a blanket underneath his pelvis and put him against the wall. This is going to help him find that natural line, and the elevation from the block allows his pelvis to tilt a little bit and make some space for the legs. From there, just get your head, the back of the head, on the wall, and you can see the line becomes much nicer. Along the same lines is the seated forward bend. The same thing is going to keep David from having success in this pose. His hamstrings are so tight that the pelvis is kind of locked in that backward tilted position, and he can't get down there. He's having to work from his back, not his hips. So we're going to use the block and the wall setup again, and this time add a blanket behind the lumbar. This blanket serves to keep David honest. If he tilts and stretches from his back too much, he's going to lose the blanket, it's going to fall through. So it kind of encourages him to work from the hip sockets rather than the spine. From here, take a deep breath, make some space in your stomach, and as you breathe out, go deeper into the pose. It may not look like much, but David is getting a much purer stretch this way, rather than straining his back and neck. So the rule of thumb here is that when you're having trouble working from your hips because of tight hamstrings, you need to elevate your pelvis with a block, a blanket, or something like that. It'll really help your natural line. Another result of tight hamstrings is that David can't get his hands down to his foot. This means he's kind of hanging in the wind. There's no stability in the pose. He's just kind of going left and right. He can't get the deep stretch. So in this situation, all you do is get a strap, put it in the arch of your foot, and use the strap not to pull or to yank the pose deeper, but to provide some stability. Just like before, the action is all coming from the hip area, but the strap gives David something to hold on to. It makes the pose a little more comfortable and controlled. So another good rule of thumb if you're having trouble with the pose is to go ahead and use a strap, but you're not using it to pull, you're using it to add some structure to the pose, making it easier to stretch the targeted muscle group. Up next is a pose that gives tight people all kinds of trouble because it hits all of their weak points, downward dog. You can see my heels are down near the ground and my back is pretty flat if not curved inversely. But David, because of his hamstrings and his rounded shoulders, is having a lot of trouble getting that shape. The back of my body looks like a V, but the back of David's looks like a C. This means that he's not really getting the optimal stretch out of dog pose. In order to remedy this, we need to break the pose into two pieces. Piece 1 is this variation right here. As you bend your knees, you're allowed to focus more on your back. You can try to find that inverse curve that really gets the shoulders and back a good stretch. Piece 2 is the legs, like David is showing. Using the power from the ground and the arms, you're going to really push up and make the legs as straight as possible, as really strong like a piece of iron. By alternating between these two variations, you're going to work the different sections of the pose and finally bring it all together for the final version. This is a good thing to remember for all poses. The forms are not set in stone. You can change it to fit your needs, and please feel free to do that. Another pose that often frustrates tight people is the standing forward bend. Because people really want to touch the floor, they tend to strain their back and their necks, kind of missing the point of the pose, which is the hamstrings. So what we're going to do is essentially raise the floor by putting some blocks down. With some support from the blocks, David can stop worrying about where his hands are and start to think about flattening out the back and actually working the backs of the legs. This version will allow him to gain flexibility a lot faster than just trying to unskillfully touch the floor. You can use this idea of support for all kinds of poses. For example, in camel pose, David's back isn't quite limber enough for him to get the support of the heels. Now you can always put your hands on your hips, but I like to do something with a chair This keeps the original flavor of the pose a lot more than having your hands on your hips. So we rest the chair against David's buttocks and allow him to reach back and use the chair for a little support. It may not look like much of a curve, but he's really feeling it this way. In almost all of these variations where you're adding some support for the body, what you're doing is taking away strain from the back, which will lead to a more pleasant and safe pose. Just one more example of this is something like plow. Because David can't touch the floor, he's getting a lot of strain in his neck, which is both disagreeable and not really safe. So we'll bring the chair out again, and you can guess what's going to happen. He's just going to rest his feet on the chair. As you practice yoga, you'll start to understand the difference between good pain, where you're getting a proper stretch, and pain, which is when something is wrong with the pose and there's strain in one part of the body that shouldn't be there. So a good general rule for varying poses is to always give your body the support that takes pressure off from your back and puts it in the correct muscle. And we'll finish with an inversion with shoulder stand. David's core is a little bit weak, so he's having trouble getting his legs into the full upright position. This will put undue pressure of the neck and take away from the general open, light feeling of the pose. So an easy variation you can do is to bend your knees. This will allow the core to have some weight taken off it and to make the back much straighter. You can use this variation for any pose that requires you to lift the legs, such as boat pose or firefly pose. Bending the knees will allow the core to become stronger at its own pace. I hope you can use these modifications in your practice if you're a little bit tight. Remember, whatever your age or ability, just start. Make a start today. Even once a month is better than never a month or never at all. You know, I also teach meditation. Oh, no, I'm too stressed to meditate. I'm just too stressed.